As you can see, there's quite a few new FileMaker Pro 10 features. We're going to try to cover each one briefly and some in greater depth. For instance, when we look at bento integration, it's very simple. There's not much to it. You can either create a new FileMaker database based on a bento source or import records from a bento source. It's that simple. We'll just cover it briefly. But in the case of script triggers, which is on the other extreme, we're going to have an entire chapter devoted to script triggers in the advanced tutorial. So, if you thought that was all the new features, well, you're wrong. There are an additional set of new features here. So there's 2 slides of new features here. It's a major upgrade. You'll see, for instance, set field by name, one of my favorite new features, and also SMTP, send mail script step. So great features. We'll cover these 2 and more in depth as we go along. But let's get into covering everything that we've seen in these slides so you can get a good idea what the new features are. So we'll start with bento integration. You can either import from your bento 2, not bento 1, only bento 2. You can import into existing FileMaker database, or you can actually create a new FileMaker database from your bento 2 data. If you import, you're going to get the field mapping dialog you're used to when you do an import, so it'll be very familiar. And to create a new database from a bento source, you just go to the quick start screen, which we're going to do right now. So we'll do new database. You'll see this new radio button here. This is new for FileMaker 10, and you can actually create a new database from quite a few sources. One happens to be bento. When you choose it and click OK, it's going to ask you to choose what from your bento 2 data source you want to import or create a new database from. Notice I didn't have to locate it. It found it for me on its own. So we'll choose address book here and the entire library. Click continue. We'll save it on the desktop. And there it is. 2 records in my address book. You'll see there's one for me, and as we scroll over here, the other one's for a company called Apple Computer. There's not much filled in here, but you get the idea. It's very easy to do. Makes a really raw database for you, and it's up to you at that point to go ahead and put the interface on it. But it's a great way if you're moving from bento 2 to FileMaker. It makes it very easy to do that. Now you could also go ahead and choose import. You'll see the bento data source is right there. Works just like your regular import. Once you have chosen the data source, it'll put up the field mapping dialog, and it'll be very familiar and very easy to do if you've ever done any kind of importing. So we'll move on here. Let's talk about some of the new functions. There's one called the char function. Now this one isn't going to make much sense on how to use it until we get into script triggers. But as you can see, it returns a value representing 1 or more Unicode points. So we supply it the Unicode points right here. It returns the value, in this case an A. Or we could supply more than 1 Unicode point, and they'll return more than 1 value, in this case A and B. And remember, it evaluates in reverse order. Notice that 97's here, but it's here. That means that you would have thought maybe that would have come last, but it actually comes first because it evaluates in reverse order. And again, it won't make a ton of sense until we start working with trigger modifier keys and the code function, which we'll cover next. So hold on. You may not understand it yet, but we'll get to it. And then the code function is essentially the opposite of the char. You supply it with a value, and it returns the Unicode points. And again, you'll use it with get trigger modifier keys, get trigger keystroke, and char function, essentially with script triggers. Then we also have the get field name function. Now this one's really handy when you think about the new feature set field by name. This is a new script step. So you usually combine these 2. I'm not saying it's the only way to use it, but this is going to be a common way to combine these 2 to make very dynamic scripts. So essentially what it does is you supply it 1 parameter, and it returns the table and field name. So for instance, if you said get field name self inside of a calculation, it will return the table and the field. A more likely scenario will be inside of a script where you'd say get the active field name. That would be where your cursor is blinking, whatever field it's in right then. You'd then surround that with the evaluate function and then get field name, and it would return the fully evaluated name of your table and field so that you could use that inside of a set field to go ahead and dynamically set that field. So you can see how it might be handy. It might not be totally clear right now because it really requires a complicated example, and we'll see that as we go through the rest of the tutorial.